John Reese was living the dream with his girlfriend Jessica until tragedy struck. He is now depressed and homeless. He is taking the subway and minding his business when a group of armed, rowdy youth led by Anton decides to pick on him. But to their surprise, he skillfully tackles all of them. They are all taken to the precinct, and the lead detective, Carter, wonders how a defenseless homeless man could do all that. Reese is not forthcoming about who he is or where he earned his combat skills. So Detective Carter collects a plastic tumbler he was using to try and lift off some fingerprints. As she gets help in the lab to analyze the prints, a lawyer shows up and says he is John's lawyer and has him released. John has no idea who he is, but is happy to leave. Outside, he is informed that someone important wants to see him. It's at that moment that Carter realizes that John's prints have been found in more than a dozen crimes. But she is a little late and misses John as he leaves with his new attorney. John is taken under a bridge where he meets Mr. Harold Finch. This man not only provides him with a lawyer, but also knows a great deal about him. Mr. Finch tells him that he only needs a purpose, and he has just the perfect proposal. As they walk down a busy street, Mr. Finch explains to John that some events in the world are not random, and some tragedies could be stopped before they happen. He has information on people who are a potential threat or in danger, but he needs someone with a particular set of skills to eliminate the threat. That's where John comes in. For starters, he shows him a woman named Diane Hansen, who, according to Mr. Finch's list, is in danger or about to commit a crime. Mr. Finch says the only way to be certain and save her is through John following her and establishing what is going on in her life. John tells Mr. Finch that it'd be easier just to call the police, but he says that no one can ever know that he has a program that detects threats. John calls his bluff, brawls his security, and declines his offer. Later that evening, John is cleaning up in a motel when he sees on the news that he is wanted by the police. He falls asleep and dreams about his girlfriend, Jessica, but is awoken by a phone call. He realizes that he is tied to the bed on one hand, and on the other end of the line is Mr. Finch. Mr. Finch makes him listen to what it means to hear someone die while you can't do anything to help them. He struggles to break himself free, and after breaking the door, he finds Mr. Finch next door, playing the incident on a radio. He tells him that it happened a few years ago, and unfortunately, such incidents are still happening, but he can do nothing about it. Mr. Finch explains to him that the woman in the tape was murdered by his husband for insurance money, and he couldn't save her on time. That said, he hands him Diane's photo and beseeches him to join his mission. John is sold. He begins working with Mr. Finch, and they follow Diane to establish why she appeared on the list. To avoid wasting time while she may be in danger, John proposes that breaking into her home is the easiest way to figure out what she is working on. While in her house, he copies some files from her computer and discovers that she is also using some sleeping pills. Their base of operation is a library building owned by a bank Finch controls. But since the bank declared bankruptcy, it would serve as a perfect workstation and hideout for the duo. Inside a cyber-protected makeshift office, John gains remote access to Diane's devices. Mr. Finch also gives him documents for his cover identity before showing him the list of potential victims. Despite Finch anticipating beforehand that the victims were in danger, the social security numbers listed were still involved in tragic incidents because he had no way of stopping it before John came along. John reiterates that mitigating the threat would be much faster if he knew where Finch was getting the information. Finch is not ready to disclose this confidential information, thus brushing him off. He sends him to another location, which turns out to be John's new home. At the NYPD, Detective Carter is still looking for John, the homeless man, with no luck. Meanwhile, John follows Diane to the courthouse and successfully hacks her cell phone. This will come in handy as he can now listen to her conversations and track her GPS. Diane is currently prosecuting Lawrence Pope, and John considers him a prime suspect. John sits in the audience when Diane interviews Detective Lionel Fusco about the findings at the crime scene Pope is alleged to have been. Fusco intensely explains that Pope allegedly killed 5 people in a drug deal gone wrong, but implies that Pope denied having shot the victim. Diane side-chats Fusco after the proceeding and asks him why he withheld information about Pope denying to have carried out the murders. In the hallway, Reese is listening in when Wheeler, Diane's co-counselor, walks by and offers to buy her dinner, but she hurriedly dismisses him. Diane and Wheeler have a romantic history, and Reese also puts him on the suspects list. The third and last person John suspects is Charles Robinson, an ex-convict that Hansen and Wheeler helped put away for 3 years. He's been out of jail for 2 months. While he was in prison, he sent threats to the prosecutors, and he appears to have a motive. After Reese breaks into his apartment, he finds nothing but a baseball cap and a Bible. Charles walks in on Reese ransacking his apartment and calmly asks him to get what he wants and not harm him. As Reese goes down the stairs, he tells Finch that Charles is off the hook since he appears to have turned his life around. Finch informs Reese that Diane is headed for county lockup. Reese and Finch listen on their earpieces as Diane persuades Pope to give out the identity of the real killer. Diane is convinced that Pope is covering up for his younger brother Michael and is too scared to go against the people framing him. Diane is pushing it, prompting Pope to push her against the bars to prevent her from saying anything that could put his life in danger. Reese is ready to intervene, but the prison guards get hold of Pope, and Diane escapes unarmed. John is dispelled to look into Pope's brother, as he might understand who is framing Pope and why Diane's name is on the list. The next scene is a flashback of John and Jessica on vacation in Mexico. The two had been dating for 6 months and were ready to settle down. With their love thriving, John had promised Jessica that he would quit his job at the CIA to be with her. At that instant, Jessica learned from the news that a crash involving 2 planes in New York had occurred. At the DA's office, Wheeler questions Diane why he visited Pope in the county lockup, but Diane stonewalls him. John is watching and listening from a distance when he sees Wheeler sneak back into Diane's office and get a copy of Michael's file. John is convinced that Wheeler is working with the bad guys, hence Diane's lack of trust. John immediately goes to look for Michael, who, on seeing him, makes a run for it. Before John can explain that he is only looking out for him, Michael creates a distraction. John slips his phone into Michael's bag, which helps track him. Aware that he will be dealing with dangerous people when reaching Michael, John tracks Anton down since he deals in illegal firearms. He walks in on Anton and his gang while they try to purchase some guns and shoots several in the knee before leaving with a few pieces. John is going through Wheeler's files when he discovers that he has a secret file on Diane. Before he can investigate further, Diane walks into the office, forcing John to flee. Finch then manages to trace Michael Pope through John's phone, but he has unfortunately been kidnapped. Through John's phone, Finch and John listen in as the people who kidnapped Michael threaten to silence him for good. John intercepts the car and, with a ski mask on his face, uses an M79 grenade launcher to shoot at the vehicle transporting Michael. The car skids and crashes, and when the kidnappers get out, he shoots one and knocks out Stills, who seems to be the leader. Michael is not too happy to be free, and John realizes it's because the men after him are actually rogue police officers. Consequently, John begins to spy on them. John and Finch are walking in a park, but John is agitated because he cannot put the pieces together about why the rogue cops are after Diane. Once again, he pressures Finch to give him access to his source of information, as it could speed things up. Finch tells him that when John was in Mexico during the New York attack, he was in New York. Finch was an ordinary tech billionaire, but that day, his life changed. John notes that he was aware of a similar program, but it was unsuccessful. John is astounded at this realization but allows Finch to expound. While the relevant list was forwarded to the NSA for urgent processing, the machine erased the irrelevant information every midnight. Over time, Mr. Finch realized that even the names on the irrelevant list still ended up in tragic incidents. Yet nothing was being done. Compelled to save lives, he uses a backdoor he purposefully created to access this irrelevant list. But all he gets are social security numbers. John wonders where the machine is at the moment. But Mr. Finch points out that the machine is the cameras and cell phones which the government is using to spy on citizens. He then tells John that he understands it will not be easy to pinpoint the threat, but they still have to keep trying because hundreds of lives are at stake. Meanwhile, Carter is informed that Anton and his gang have been arrested while trying to purchase firearms, and according to their statements, they were attacked by one guy in a suit. At the county lockup, Pope is set up for an attack by fellow inmates. Reese and Finch are trying to figure out how the corrupt cops are connected to Hansen or why her life is in danger. They speculate that the cops who work in narcotics could use their badges to make drug busts, then steal the merchandise, kill the sellers, and then frame people like Pope for the murders. They are now tying loose ends, with Pope being killed in jail. John is keeping watch on Diane when she gets a call. The caller asks her to meet him in a given location. Convinced that Wheeler is the caller and is about to harm Diane, he steals a car and follows her to the meeting. John has his gun ready to intervene in case anyone tries to kill Diane, but imagine his shock when he finds out who the mastermind is. Before he could even digest this new discovery, Detective Fusco finds him and brings him out. Diane, the victim turned perpetrator, orders Fusco to take care of John. He then orders Stills and his men to kill Wheeler since he has uncovered the truth about Diane and her illegal dealings. Fusco is driving to an isolated location with the intention of getting rid of him. John starts up a conversation and he is curious to know why Fusco decided to become a dirty cop. Fusco points out that people in the corporate world do far worse things and they get away with it. John tells him that he is different from Stills, so he will let him live. Fusco giggles at the mere suggestion that a man in cuffs is making threats, but John is relentless. John then tells him that from that moment, he will work for him from the inside before pulling out a concealed grenade. The explosion causes the car to lose control and flip over. John gets out, pulls Fusco out, then takes his gun. After uncuffing himself, he shoots Fusco, who is wearing a vest, to make it look like an attack, then leaves. John contacts Finch and tells him Wheeler is in danger. Stills is getting ready to execute Wheeler. Wheeler is with his son and is headed for the lobby, unaware that Stills and his men are about to kill them. Stills is holding a gun to Robinson, but John sneaks up on one of Stills' men, disrupting the plan. Wheeler and his son get off the elevator, and the child playfully drifts away, oblivious to the danger that could have been. As soon as Wheeler leaves, Stills threatens to kill Robinson, but John shoots one of his men in the knee first. He then lets go of his hostage and is left with Stills, who is still holding a gun to Robinson. Stills is making more threats, but John is nonplussed. Robinson escapes unharmed. Diane is in a courtroom, seemingly disturbed about Stills' whereabouts. As she plays an audio recording for a closing argument, Diane is aghast when she hears her voice recording when she was ordering Stills to carry out the hit on Wheeler. John then ambushes Fusco in his car and reiterates that he works for him now. His first task is to take care of Stills' body, which he has no choice because John shot him using his gun. Finch tells John that if he wants out, he will pay him enough money to disappear. But if he chooses to stay, he might end up dead since too many dangerous variables are involved. Both men fake their deaths to stay away from the government, but their union and mission will save a lot of lives. The first episode ends with Carter arresting one of the corrupt cops, with her sole interest being the man in a suit. John is close by, watching and listening, before disappearing into the crowd. He is now fully conscious of all the cameras, the cornerstone of the machine,